Good morning, everyone. Welcome to session G1, Cross-Pollination, Lessons Learned from Online Delivery to Enhance the Return to In-Person Information Literacy Instruction. A little housekeeping. My name is Claire Ehrlich. I'm the moderator for this session. The session is being recorded and it'll be available to view after the conference. We ask that you remain muted until the presenter invites you to unmute yourself. Please put any questions in the chat and I'll share them with the presenter. Our presenter this morning is Lisa Czirr. Lisa is an associate librarian at SUNY Cortland's Memorial Library. She's the education liaison and manages the curriculum collection, the Teaching Materials Center. Lisa received her MLS from the University at Buffalo. Her research interests include creative pedagogies and topics combining information literacy with teacher education or literacy. Take it away.
Okay, excellent. Thank you so much for that introduction. Really appreciate it. Really happy to have everyone here. So hi, I know you're all out there. I want to start out with a little bit of background about this presentation. I decided to present on this topic for a couple of reasons. I teach a lot. And I think one of the reasons for that is that education faculty often really understand the value of information literacy. They're really tuned into it. I just have a really good relationship with them. And I also have, I'm dealing with a very large student population. So sometimes I might be teaching 4 sections of the same class. That adds up. I don't always quantify it. But when I talk about I teach a lot, I really do. So I've decided to bring the numbers out this time. I taught 81 sessions over the past academic year. Of those 81, 41 were synchronous, 38 were asynchronous, and then there were 2 that were mixed. So I did no in-person whatsoever this past year. And I'll talk about that a little later. And that was actually pretty comparable to a regular year. So I felt like I had a lot of background. I was doing a lot of this, right? The other thing is that I, right away, almost pretty early on in the semester, I thought, wow, I really want to think about what I'm learning here and what am I going to take back with me. So I had this thought in mind right at the start. I was making notes. I knew, you know, eventually we're going to return to something like normal. So anyway, that's a little bit of background. So now to get into the presentation, actually, we'll get started. Let's talk about bananas, because why not? Actually, I have a little bit of a metaphor. I like my weird metaphors and comparisons. So this is something that, you know, I use in my classes all the time. So in this case, the banana. The original banana that was actually sold in grocery stores in America was called the Gros Michel. And prior to the 1950s, this was the main banana. What happened was a disease came along, the Panama disease. It's a fungus that pretty much virtually wiped this out. You can still get it, but it's pretty rare. They actually substituted in another variety of banana. So the Cavendish banana is the banana we have now. So the banana of today is not the banana of, say, 1920. So I want you to keep that in mind. There's this idea that, you know, something came up, some crisis emerged, right? Some horrible disease emerged, and then, right, forced everyone to adapt in some way they did not expect. So, you know, that's where my little kind of metaphor comes along. I also had titled this cross-pollination because with self-pollination, you're essentially getting plants of the same thing, clones of the same plant. Whereas with cross-pollination, you actually have a little bit of variety, right? Genetic variety. A pollinator takes the pollen from one flower to another. So, you know, if a disease comes along and you've got cross-pollination happening, it's not going to wipe everything out, right? And you might also get like kind of cool, unexpected effects from that cross-pollination. So those are my kind of like opening things for you to think about. I did put a link into the chat for Poll Everywhere. So I'm going to have my little tech check now. I just want to make sure it actually should be active right now. So it should be in there. Thank you very much. I think it's just placed into the chat. Excellent. So please do respond. I think I do have something active. If not, you will see it. And actually throughout this presentation, it will come up in the slides. So you will see that link again and again. And for those who prefer to bring it up on your phones, you can absolutely do that too, right? Sometimes it's easier to have that plus watching a screen. So, you know, use your own way, right, for that. Okay, so just making sure you're all set with that. You know, I always like to do that at the start. And oops, let me kind of backtrack a little bit. Oh yeah, we'll go forward. I always like to do that at the start. I will get into this. This is a little sneak preview of what I'm going to be doing throughout this session. So I'm going to do a little like before, during, after, right? We'll kind of talk about what's changed and what are the big takeaways, right? But I think that all of us had this understanding for beforehand, right? Thinking about technology and how you're using it. Why not talk about it while I'm doing this little tech check, right? You use it when it makes sense, not just because, right? When it fits what you're doing and what you need to know. Pick a tech tool or two and stick with it. I think that's something that's so key, right? You don't want to have you don't want to be spending the whole session teaching somebody technology. You also don't want to be having a lot of, maybe tech failures. So that's why it's very important. It was always important to have backup plans. But the during and after, I actually merged these two together because, yeah, the tech check, the kind of like priming everything at the start, I thought was really helpful, especially during, so I would tell students up front, we're going to be using this and, make sure everybody can log in and get on, right, and do everything and be prepared. It helps because then you don't have to break up the flow later on, right, of the session when you're actually asking them questions. So making sure that you are, helping everyone to get ready. You can ask simple, easy questions and icebreakers. That's a great time to do that sort of thing, right? And sending and resending links, just making sure everybody gets everything. And that was really critical during when, we didn't, people might have, a tech problem that kick them off, they were coming in late, whatever the case might be, right? And throughout this presentation too, when I talk about especially the after, I'm going to highlight things that are kind of important. Doesn't mean it's the only thing that's important, right? Everything on the slide is definitely key to consider afterward, but the things that are really standouts, I think, in my mind. So I'm going to also have a running list of these lessons learned. These are going to be like kind of like big overview, wide, big picture lessons, but best practices really are best practices, right? I think the things that we kind of already knew did translate over into online teaching and will translate back once we return. All right, so let's see, how are you doing? So hopefully you've had a chance to respond. If not, please do respond. pollev.com/LCZIRR. So just, just a casual, how are folks, doing? Oh, we have a lot of, okay, great. I'm seeing a lot of folks. There are a few folks who are like, really, it's Friday. I do see a few of those. Some people are kind of so-so. You might be, I know, I realize we're not doing it in the same way we're accustomed to in person, but maybe you're still conferenced out, right? There might be some folks in that yellow. Glad to see nobody's in the red. I do have another question for you, and this is going to lead us more into the content. I'd like you to pick the image that best describes your feelings about teaching during the pandemic. Well, so what meme resonates with you, right? For how teaching felt, or just how it went. Just give me your thoughts. Give folks a second. Oh, I wasn't expecting. Okay, interesting. I'm seeing some things. So some people were like, there's a few people, oh yeah, I'm seeing some good, like nailed it. Okay, great. Maybe a little disaster. I put disaster girl in there. She was a late addition. And I thought, well, why not, right? Maybe people feel like you've got that explosion in the background. But I did expect, actually it's funny because B was one that I thought there'd be quite a bit of, right? The kind of, you're trying to hold it together. That meme is glorious. And it really does. I think it conveys something, right? It conveys some feelings there. So good. Okay, so we got a sense for kind of how people felt, and I do understand that. That is totally understandable. That kind of feeling that like, well, this is fine, right? Okay, so now we're going to start as soon as before I really kind of dig into my perspectives, I want to let you have space too to think about this, right? To think this through. So now what I'd like you to do, visualize yourself. Take a moment, just kind of in your mind's eye. You can close your eyes if you want to, right? What is coming to mind teaching pre-pandemic in the before times? So what kind of things are coming to mind? What do you see? And you can jot down some quick notes. This will help actually for answering questions, right? What's happening? What are you doing? What are the actions happening? Right? What are some of the verbs you can use? We'll make this an English lesson. What are some of the verbs you can use and adjectives you can add, right? Okay. So you can make some quick, just quick bullet notes. First things that come up, right? Okay. So now you're going to visualize yourself. So we're going beyond the meme, right? That was kind of your initial impression, but now actually visualize, right, in, doing your teaching during the pandemic. And once again, make some quick notes. So what's different and what's the same? That's really something I want you to think about, right? So what do you see? what are some things that have changed for you, that did change for you, right, during this past year? All right. Really just want this to be just your quick first impressions, right? And I do want to see, all right, what you're thinking. So what is coming up? What's like a major theme or something that came up in that little brainstorm? Are there any big differences, other ideas, things that, that stood out? So give you a moment. If if you're still working on your notes, that's fine, right? Kind of put them together. Okay, so we've got somebody who really enjoys gaming. Maybe you could still play games over the online version. Here we go. Sometimes it always lags, I'm noticing. It always starts coming up. Ooh, transfer. I like that word. There's our cross-pollination. Displayed, presenting, students. Very nice. Able, connecting, consider, missed. Maybe some things were missed. We'll talk about that. In-person versus not, online, check, growth. I do see some growth happening there. Great. And I do see that, what is coming up, and it's very fascinating to me. And I think this is great because it's definitely at the heart of like what I think about when I think about teaching anyway. We're here for the students, right? It is about the students. So I'm really happy, actually. That's really cool to see them kind of taking the forefront, right? Being mentioned a lot. Expressions, body language. There's a lot of things that are kind of interesting coming up there. Great. Okay. All right. So now, let's see here. So that is kind of the thrust of what I'm going to talk about, right? Like so the ideas of what's worth keeping, what might be better, what might be different in ways that we never looked at in a certain way before. I'll get into that with a lesson learned in a moment, right? And what the idea is, so from those notes I had taken right back when I was kind of doing this and thinking ahead, I kind of started deciding, okay, I'm going to organize all this. So I have these big major themes I'm going to touch on, and I'm going to do this kind of before, during, after, like I mentioned. I think it is kind of funny when I'm talking about before times, it sounds like this ancient times, right? Very long ago. It's only a year, but a lot has gone on, right? It does feel like a long time. So anyway, this is going to be kind of the overview of how it's going to look. So we'll start out with planning and we'll go from there. And by the way, there will be some overlap, I think, between some of these categories. So by the time I get toward like one of the later categories, I'll be like, yeah, I already talked about that, right? There's a lot that fits together. So talking about planning in the before times, and a lot of us are, familiar with what it looked like, right? You might use something like the backward design process to organize your sessions. Really helps to create a great lesson plan that is outcome based. So all of your activities have a purpose. If you're a novice instructor, I can certainly tell you more about that or give you more info about that later. But absolutely organize your sessions. Timing. By timing, I'm actually really talking more about the timing of when you did your planning, right? If it's a class you've taught before, maybe you gave yourself a week, you didn't really need long. I realize we don't always have the luxury to plan. Sometimes faculty requests something and it's next week, it's tomorrow, right? But if and when you can, planning. And I always notice this trend, I do it anyway. And I just notice it in general in the culture. We say we're gonna do summer projects, we're gonna take off and do other summer things. But then once August hits, that's it. It's like fall light. We're going back, we're kind of thinking about going back to class, right? At that point, it's like summer's over, right? So anyway, August is a lot of the time when I start, again, thinking, okay, instruction, gotta get moving a little bit, right? Because I do teach a lot and I want to get things organized. So that's just something to think about in the before. And faculty communication, well, you might have, I know I do a lot of email discussions, especially if we've done something again, let's just kind of go back and forth and set things up. Right. But sometimes they might come by, they might actually come in, in person, right. And kind of talk to you there. So that's something to keep in mind. So absolutely keep that in mind. All right. During, right. So what did that look like while we were in the pandemic? Well, you know what? Some things were a little different. Some things not as different as you might have thought. For backward design, especially when I was planning, right, I actually found that a lot of what I could do, I could still do. I just had to maybe change and tweak some things so it would work in the online environment. But the big key thing was to simplify. I simplified a lot. So that was one thing, but I did use my same lesson plans and kind of, restructure, right? Timings start much earlier, right? If you're taking 1 week, give yourself 2. I had instruction on the brain all summer, actually. So, I took as much professional development often as I could, especially early summer. So I took a lot individually. We did some stuff actually among the libraries. So the librarians did a lot of planning, and we did our own professional development as a group. So that was happening. But then I also started like prior to the August rush there, which actually it didn't feel too bad. I will say I actually felt pretty good about that. I did not have, it would be the meme with the child going, yes, that actually helped me to not feel too stressed or rushed. So it was great to start so much earlier. Faculty communication, of course, emailing, but then, instead of meeting in person, that was off the table. You do a lot of this, right, over video chat. So whether it was WebEx, Zoom, something else, right, Teams. All right, so after, once again, the things that are highlighted, the standout things, but everything is important in some way, right? I absolutely want to stick to my simplified plans. Yes, there are some things I'm definitely going to change back around to say, well, this, here's how we can do it in an in-person way. But overall, the simplification, the flow of things was so, it just felt so good. Things worked well. So that's something to keep in mind, is that simplification. Starting earlier also worked well, right? That was also very helpful to me in planning for all these sessions. And then faculty communication. I just think of the old, right? Could this meeting have been an email sort of thing, right? But this is an interesting takeaway in general, I think. So yes, I'm talking about classes, but there are times where I think that the virtual chat is just enough. You've got a busy day, you're going from room to room, building to building, maybe you've got a class in between a meeting and a lot going on, especially during those busy times. So yeah, why not throw in video chats where they make sense, right? I personally, and I know some of this might be personal preference. I don't necessarily have to be in the room breathing the same air, right? I feel like I still get the connection. Not everybody feels that way. I understand that. So anyway, that's just something to consider. Could that video chat in turn be an email, right? So you can kind of simplify as much as you need to for timing's sake. All right, so from all of this, the big lesson, and this also has, you'll see some of these resonating throughout, but the idea of looking at old things in a new way, getting a new perspective. So like the lesson plans that I looked at and I kind of like, oh, here's how I could change it, right? I think getting a new perspective is so valuable. And I'm one of those people, well, I started out with a metaphor, right? I love activities, things like that make you think outside the norm in a new way. So approaching something, in that kind of outside the box thinking, that's something that I enjoy. So getting a new perspective is important. And I think that maybe we do need to be shaken up more often, right? We don't need a pandemic for that, right? I don't think, we shouldn't be having pandemics all the time, but I do think getting shaken up is important, right? Getting out of the routine that you're usually stuck in. All right, so communication. Okay, all right, so another poll. So please do tell me, what do you think about online communication for class? So basically class delivery is probably how I should have phrased it, but delivering classes online, what do you think? Was it deeply challenging for you? Was it kind of like, okay, did you see it like as being really beneficial and having advantages? Or was it like, yeah, it was better than anything else I've done before? So let's see like how people are feeling about that. And this is really gonna vary. It was one of those things where I heard from faculty who were pretty dissatisfied and then I heard from people who were like, yeah, no, I love it. Got a range. Good. Okay. And actually I see a lot of people are saying, yeah, it was actually beneficial. There are advantages. I'll hear, I'll agree with that. But I think that, yeah, some people, and I understand we're all different comfort levels of technology and that's okay, right? Some people kind of have to get the hang of things. Everybody does to some extent, right? And yes, I appreciate that some people just were so frustrated. And I think it's kind of interesting. We do have somebody who's like, yep, I want to online, do online instruction, right? All the time. All right. So let's see here. Click forward. One more question. So how do you prefer to answer questions? So this is kind of thinking, almost like getting you to think like a student, right? And some of these do overlap, right? This is more of a sorting one. So just as a reminder, if you've used Poll Everywhere before, but even if you haven't, right, you have to kind of click or press on the option. There'll be an up and down arrow. So put toward the top what you like, put toward the bottom what you don't like as much. Again, some of these overlap because you might be thinking about something solo and writing it out. I just want to kind of know what stands out. And don't forget to hit submit. This one, I always like to make sure I give you kind of good directions because I know that it's a little tricky if you haven't done it much. Okay. See, people are saying, so we have a lot of people who like to chat, like to talk it out. Oh, then writing took over. Oh, this one's always fun. You kind of get to watch like what's winning. What have we got? We don't have a lot of artists here. We don't have a lot of video people interested in video so much, you know. Yep. Okay. So we got some interesting. Yeah. So writing or talking it out. Okay. So both of those are kind of getting a good, you know, definitely, or thinking about it. Right. So yeah. Oh, thinking about it just went up. Right. All right. So we're, you know, and I understand a lot of introverts here probably, right? A lot of librarians are. So, you know, definitely. And we'll talk more about this, right? So, but this is thinking like a student. But when I was organizing this with communication, I saw these three big threads or themes emerging, right? So the class meeting itself, student-to-student communication, so how they communicate with each other, teacher-to-student communication, right? These are the three big, threads to think about. So the class meeting format, we'll talk about that first. So first, before times, right? In a computer, classroom, computer lab, in person though, right? And I realize there are some people who have programs that are online. We also have people who have like entire departments or entire schools are online. Yes, that is out there. I think the majority of us and probably those of us attending this, those of you attending this, most likely we're doing in-person instruction, right? But just, I realize there are others, right, who are not doing that so much. Well, that's off the table suddenly, right? Now, some of my colleagues, I will say, did choose to present in person. So that was kind of a choice and it was an option that people did if it fit, right? Or say the teacher was, professor was teaching in person. So maybe I shouldn't have crossed it out, but in my experience, I did not do it. It was a choice. Actually, I did decide, for safety's sake, it makes more sense to go fully online. I also thought about it because there were some classes that were just online, so that made sense. There were those hybrid classes where they'd meet with half the class, right, in person, and then half the class would be online. That was going to be, logistically, I couldn't imagine doing that. I'd have to do a condensed version twice of a class. So suddenly in my 4 sessions would be like 8 small sessions. I couldn't do it, right? That was a little much. I would rather have the 75-minute session, the regular session, as one online meeting. And actually the in-person, being distanced in person would have been difficult. Especially I'm thinking of my teaching style. I'm the kind of person, I like to be really enthusiastic. I like to do a lot of group work and stuff. And of course, we had necessary precautions that meant that you couldn't do that in person, right? We'd have barriers. You'd have a mask on, you'd be seated across the room such that you'd have to use online tools anyway. So it didn't make sense to me. And the other reason actually was that I did not want to have to suddenly switch modalities, right? And just be like, oh, you got to suddenly move this in-person class you planned for online in case something happened. Something did. Cortland did have to pause partway through the fall. So we did have to go to fully online. So I was already ready for that, right? For any classes. And I think, I don't remember how many were affected because I just seamlessly transitioned, right? But I didn't have that problem. So anyway, synchronous, right? Video. So some kind of video tool, and then asynchronous, some kind of online module were the options there. Okay. All right. So what is this going to look like after? What are we going to see? Right. So we have to meet our students where they are. 100%. Absolutely. They want to be there. Right. They are here. They're residential. So we absolutely are going to be in person. Right. We're looking to do that in the fall. That's what, how things are going to go. Right. No other problems going through. Right. So that's absolutely it. And that would be the primary means of meeting. Do I want to offer the others? Potentially, if there's a place for it. Now we know how it works and how it can work. And I think that's important. So for online synchronous, yeah, there might be something difficult to schedule. Maybe you have to be away for a conference and you'd like to still deliver a class. I don't know. There's something you could do there, right? So those difficult to schedule things. Spur of the moment, I put a question mark there because I realize not everyone has that comfort level. After having done this enough, I actually have discovered that it's pretty natural and it feels a lot like teaching. Like, yes, there are differences, right? And there are some things admittedly that are lost, right? Not having the face-to-face, right, connections. However, adapting to it wasn't as difficult as I thought it would be. It actually is something that, I myself, if there's bad weather, I wouldn't have a problem doing that. Of course, it would depend on if classes are canceled. There's a lot of logistics, but anyway, something to consider. Asynchronous, yes. Is there a space for that? Absolutely. These two things almost seem to contradict, but sessions where you have a lot of intensive material, videos, right? Stuff that they maybe they just need that space to do it on their own time. Or something, the flip side is kind of letting them practice skills, letting them practice like some of that kind of basic stuff, and then you do the more interesting stuff in class, right? So making a better use of the flipped classroom potentially. I think that maybe there might be some faculty who would not have previously considered, having a flipped classroom or doing the flipped experience. who might, right? So that's something to think about. And then, of course, I know I put a question here, mixed hybrid, right? Are there times where it might make sense where you do, like, say, for example, with the flipped classroom, or you just have, you have part on one way or the other, right? You kind of just, so you have a shorter session in person. I don't know. There's always room, right, to explore, room to think about. All right, so there's that. Now, the student-to-student communication, I found this kind of interesting. I actually kind of noticed like a little flip happening, flip-flop during, but we'll start with before. So of course, they're communicating verbally. Now that's for doing the actual class, right? You might have, say, small group discussions, right? You might break them out into groups, have them talk to each other, right? When you're actually doing the material. You might have chatter among those seated nearby. So that chatter, as they come in, they talk about stuff. They might start, veering off and talking about their weekend plans, what they're having for dinner, all that kind of thing, right? But you do have the chatter, but you also have this spontaneity, right? Spontaneous chatter. So someone walks in, or someone shouts something across the room, or overhears something, right? So there's all this verbal communication happening in the classroom. Written communication was more supplemental. So in other words, you might do something where they're collaborating and they're doing something in a shared document, other collaborative tools, right? I'm a big fan of collaborative tools in general. It's a great way to capture the responses. And so that's really great. Texting and social media, a lot of our faculty are pretty strict about that and make sure they actually have policies, right? So students aren't sitting there texting their friends while they're, in class, right? And faculty can very, very easily kind of notice that, right? They can go around the room. So that was off the table. It's often one of those things where I always make a point, if I'm planning to say do an activity where I want students to use their phones, I make sure to let them, let the faculty know, because some faculty are just so strict about it. They don't want to even see a phone, right? So that's just something that's kind of an aside. But anyway, that's student to student before. During, it was a flip. Written was the majority of their communication in class. Let's think about that for a moment, because if you do consider, okay, what was happening to speaking verbal communication? Well, you're definitely going to still have small group discussions, and that's where it's going to happen, right? The real discussion is going to happen like within breakout rooms. So they're going to go off into the little rooms and talk about something, but whole group, no way. There's almost this kind of implicit understanding that when we're in the full classroom, right, we're in the full Zoom room or whatever platform, right, it's kind of like that's the room for the business, that's the room for the class, right, class content. And yes, faculty will try to be kind of, get people chatting, chit chat, kind of like a nice little kind of, pre-class just talk, right, kind of casual, but it still wasn't the same. You didn't have like side conversations happening verbally, right? There was no kind of like crosstalk. Nobody's going to unmute themselves to talk about their weekend plans with the entire room, right? So that was different. Instead, the student-to-student discussion was happening written, right? So a shared document, a collaborative tools. In this case, it wasn't just supplementing. It was like, sometimes, especially if you were doing it, say you did have that with the full room, it was the discussion, right? Or a poll or something, right? To get to just to see what people are thinking. Chat, using the chat, which I loved using absolutely during, because I saw that in the chat too. Somebody mentioned it. Aha, I was keeping track of that. But I did see somebody mention, yeah, using the chat, especially for the full group, to get people to just talk. And it's especially because, like, in polls, I want to capture certain information, certain thoughts. But sometimes there'll be a question I'll ask, and I'll say, just throw it in the chat. Just put that in there. So that was really great for in the class. But think about how the students were probably talking to each other. They're going to be talking through private channels, right? I am holding my phone in my hand right now, and you don't know, actually, right? It's right here. Just to give you an idea, right? And yeah, they were. Let's face it, they were texting. Let's face it, right? We know we can't, or other social media, right? They were doing something. But the interesting thing here with this flip here meant that all the chatter that was happening in student to student would be among like friends, people who interact normally, right? Because it has to be somebody who's like, you've got their number, they're in your phone, or they're somebody you're connected with, right, on your social media, right? So it's very different, right? So it was a very different kind of communication happening that we did not see. That was, before times. So after, what do we see? Well, I think there's a case to say, sure, let's harness the written, let's see what we can do with it, right? Small group discussions are back on the table. So, hopefully they'll be able to kind of go around the room. Chatter, with the whole group, absolutely, they'll be doing that again. Is there something we can do with that? More we can do with that? I don't know. Some of these things are more kind of speculations too. I'm just kind of I want to put ideas out there. Because I do want to have like things that you can just take away and think about. Written communication, you know, again, back to, and those tried and true methods, the shared documents, collaborative tools, absolutely 100%. I love using them. Using something like chat, shared instead of private channels, like back chats. I know some people have used them to success. I've actually been to presentations about like using back channels. I never really kind of caught on board with it. Like I never really did much with it, never really had anything come to fruition, but you know, now I'm kind of going, oh, should I rethink that? Is there something we could do with that, right? I never really got much use out of it, but sure, there could be something to rework it and look at it now that we've had this way to, right, to see student to student talk in this new and different way. And by the way, going along with this, I was on an online learning committee. So it was a campus committee dealing with like student learning and how can we better help our students during this pandemic. They did a survey and, you know, there was a lot of obviously students who were frustrated and all of that. But one thing that came away, and this was like the big one, and this is like the thing that always sticks out in my head, the big takeaway from that, students miss interactions. They missed interaction, like through and through. That was kind of a big thing that kept coming up again and again. So we need to harness that student interaction, you know, right? The classmate interaction. That's something that was lost and returned and restored, right? That I think we really have a new, I know I have a new perspective on like, yeah, these connections. So that's something to keep in mind. Okay. All right, so I have a couple of kind of just interesting little questions. Before times, right, when you're teaching, did you like bother like using or learning all students' names while you're in classes in these little one-shot sessions? You know, be honest, right? This is not being recorded, or I don't know why it would be a big deal, but you know, yeah, I'm just kind of curious, right? Yep. And I you know what? I had a prediction, and I was thinking that, you know, most folks probably didn't do much. You've seen them once, one and done. So why bother, right? Why is it a big deal? Well, let's see here. I click ahead. Did you normally follow up with students after the class? Did you normally follow up with students in the before times? So did you follow up with like the entire class at all? Was that something that was done? So give that a moment, because I know when I clicked over, the bars were filled for some reason. I don't know what was going on, but that's okay. Maybe it's just a lag. Like again, that lag. Okay, and some people were sometimes. Okay, and again a mix, right? You know, and the last one too. I think there was probably somebody in every category, right? But a lot of folks, yeah, sometimes I do something, right? You know, but some people maybe never, some people maybe always, depending on what you prefer to do, right? So teacher to student communication. So this is the teacher to student. You as the teacher, right? I broke this down because it was getting really dense. There was a lot there. So modes of communication, then talking about full and small, and then the after class stuff. So this is again that verbal written, right? Beforehand, you know, in regular times, right? Verbal would be the big thing. Written would be supplemental. You might have instructions, something you might hand them or give them to look at on the screen, right? You did not come in just with text. You did not deliver your whole class session in text. That would be weird. You know, so that was kind of before. During, well, yeah, synchronous, like I said, I noticed after doing it a while, yeah, it flows and it moves a lot like regular, right? So that's something just to keep in mind, is this idea that, yeah, okay, that was pretty much, you know, similar, right? But of course, if you were doing something asynchronous, you needed to have written text to help explain, guide, you know, right? Take them through the material. So that did change. That experienced the little flip that, you know, we saw with the student thing. And then video. Making use of video to have some instructor presence, to be there, right? To give them like a face and a person and personalize it a little more rather than them just reading all this text. So using that, especially in those asynchronous ones, right, was pretty big. Okay, so after, yeah, what do we think? What could this be, right? I think that, you know, there's definitely a case to be made for potential places where video might make sense. Having a video as part of something they can come back to later, which I will talk about that in a little bit with student materials. I'll talk about, you know, handouts and stuff. But yeah, so video, maybe if you are doing something asynchronous, right? There's a lot of great tools out there to help. You know, I'm always putting stuff right into YouTube. I've got a YouTube channel all set up for all these videos. I use Clipchamp a lot. Loom is another big one. A lot of folks are using, a lot of other tools out there, right? But the point being that, yeah, I think making use of video is kind of an interesting takeaway from this. I never really did much with it before. I was always concerned that I'd have to update it a lot, or you know, there'd be problems or it'd be difficult to do, but it was very easy, actually. It wasn't too bad. And you can do something that's more of a, like a general hello, an introduction. So if you're not showing a tool that's changing all the time and you're just kind of doing a little explanation, you don't have to change it all the time, right? So teacher to student communication. This is talking about the full class small groups, because again, my breakout, right? I'm breaking this down a little bit. So in the full class, you might ask questions, and some of us do this spontaneously. Something comes up, you just want to ask the whole class. Then you get the, crickets chirp, 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 chirp. One of those best practices is to wait a few seconds, right? So you do that. Eventually, you do get the hand raise, right? Hermione Granger raises her hand and answers the question, right? Somebody will, right? Eventually. Or you could call on someone, which, yikes. I personally, I think because I myself hate being called on suddenly. So I'm kind of like hyper aware of it for students. So I put myself in their shoes. So anyway, I don't like to do it anyway. I've known people who've done workarounds even without knowing student names, but you don't know their names. So how are you going to call on them? Person over there. I've known people who kind of try to make it funny, but I just don't even bother, right? I do like things, so strategies like think, pair, share, polls, similar strategies which take the pressure off. Think, pair, share is great for taking that pressure off, right? Because you give them the space to like think and get their thoughts together first, organize it a bit, talk to somebody, and then share it out. And then suddenly they're sharing out something that the two of them came up with, right? Or the group came up with. So it's not like their own stupid idea, not that their idea is stupid, but they have that, there's that anxiety, right? So it makes it just so much easier. Small groups, right? Going around the room and checking in, you could do that during previous times, right? You had them working, so you're being the guide on the side, stepping in where you need to, you overhear stuff. And you would overhear stuff that would tell you to like, you have to go to that other table, or you'd overhear something someone says that you want to bring up to the whole class, right? Things like that. Okay. During, of course, you could do something very similar in the full group, right? You ask them to use the hand raise options or just unmute themselves. Chirp, 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 chirp. Our crickets are very tech savvy. Chirp, chirp, right? You'd still wait. And I would still get, you still would get responses, right? But the interesting thing here is you can see their names on the screen. So you can theoretically see who you're calling on if you're a call on kind of person, which I'm kind of, throughout this presentation, I'm giving my perspective, but I also am respecting, right, that people have different ways of doing things. So if you like to do that, great. Or you see that person with their hand raised and suddenly it's not just you pointing across the room and pointing at that person with hand raised. You can say, oh, Hermione, I see that you have the hand raised up. Do you want to say what you want to say, right? Or thank you for sharing that, after they've shared, thank you for sharing that so-and-so, right? Using the names, that personalization. Collaborative tools, 100%. I could have put that actually at the start, right? Because I've used them all along. And then small groups, again, because they're in those breakout rooms. So it's like they've gone into a room, they've shut the door, it's secretive and private, right? But you have to give them collaborative tools to keep on task. That's one thing, right? So they're producing something when they're in that room. They're not just, right, fooling around talking about the weekend, but you can also warn them. I would warn them and say, oh, I'm going to go around. Don't forget, I'm going to be there. I'm going to check in on all of you, right? So that's just a good strategy stuff to keep in mind. Well, after, I think there's a case to be made, and I'm still kind of thinking it over and what I might do for names. And I realized, like, even I'm thinking back to being a student, I always thought name tags were really just kind of cheesy. I didn't like them. I don't know. I was always averse to them for some reason. But maybe, alongside name tags, other ideas like the little name cards or place things or making them creative. I'm sure there's some ideas out there that I can explore. I'm always up for trying, right, experimenting new ideas. Using collaborative tools, again, other alternatives to putting on the spot. That just comes back to the idea of just keep exploring and trying new things out, right? There's a tried and true methods we all go back to, but I'm always up for like something else that, right, that gives them other ways to think about to think about what they're doing, the content. Going around the rooms and checking in small groups, right? That's back on the table. Overhearing's back on the table. I'm repeating collaborative tools. I just thought it was that important, right? And I kind of, as I was going back through this, I said that twice. I'll keep it. Redundancy is fine sometimes when you're trying to emphasize something. Okay. And so student-teacher communication. So this is talking about the after class. And this is what I talked about, the follow-up, right? It's not just the walking outside the room, but it's the actual follow-up. And that's one of those things that it depends on the person. Some of us do that. I wasn't really doing that consistently. I didn't really follow up with the class like that. But I always did in asynchronous classes during the pandemic. So when I structured those classes, I use Microsoft Forms. We use Office 365, so we actually have access to all these tools, which is great. Microsoft Forms allows you to check off a box that says only collect names responses from within my institution, essentially, right? So in other words, I was naturally just getting all the student emails and names when they responded, right, to the questions I would give them in these forms. So I had these emails collected. I had them gathered. Perfect, right? I didn't have to ask the professor, give me a list of names, emails, get everything, figured out, or figure out who was actually in class or who did what project and try to match it up if they put their first name on it. I don't know. There's a lot of logistics, right? But Forms just does it so elegantly that I was like, this is great. So I did follow up. So I told them how they did in the asynchronous classes, right? Flipgrid is another awesome example because that one is a video tool. So you can ask video questions and then get video responses from the students. It let me see those students who I was not going to otherwise see as people, right? They'd just be text on the screen. So it's kind of like a video forum, right? Instead of doing asking questions and responding in text, it gave them that video option. And so it was cool because I could see them, I could respond to them, right? In just kind of a verbal video format, right? So that was kind of interesting. Okay. And then I could, I would do that kind of asynchronously, right? That was asynchronous. So on my own time, on their own time, before whatever deadline their professor gave them. Now, after class, yeah, I think definitely I'm in the sometimes camp. That's where I'm at. I don't think I couldn't see doing it for every single class. That would be a lot. But I think that it definitely is something that has validity because it opens lines of communication. I'll get into that in just a moment. I have a summary of this section. I just thought that there was so much in here. I really need to summarize it. So anyway, opening that door though, I think is important. So I think definitely there's a case to be made for doing that. And if you use something like Forms or even Flipgrid, there's a way that you can, right? You're responding to students outside of the realm of just at one class. So that's something important to keep in mind, right? Now, here's that summary overview, right? I think the big takeaways from this section, people do communicate in different ways and styles, so give them that. But here's the trick. Not everybody communicates, even if you've got a preference, you're not gonna always communicate in that same way. I'm a person who loves talking, communicating, and writing. That's just my go-to. However, I fully acknowledge there are times where I'd rather talk it out. I like to work individually. There are times where I really need to talk it out with a person, right? So I think we all kind of, do different things, right? Have different ways we want to be able to communicate. So give them that. Give them different options and ways to respond, even in the same class. Give them the opportunity. I know it sounds weird, but to do the video recordings, yes, even while in person. So go off and record a video response in Flipgrid, because then you could respond to that later. Then it's not just Hermione Granger who you're hearing from. You're going to hear a response from everybody in the class, right? And it takes the pressure off because they're just responding, they're recording it on a screen, they're done. And you need to also give them different kinds of questions. And this is where this communication overlaps a lot with the activities, right? All these things go together. So ask them higher order, lower order, opinion, mood, right? All these things have to happen. Don't put them on the spot, right? Don't just rely on just one person to have all the answers. What's in a name? Potentially a lot. I think knowing someone's name does personalize things in a way that maybe, I just realized that it was there. Having those names on the screen was like an aha. That was a big aha for me. Post-class follow-up. Yeah, I think it leads to stronger connections and students do return. So when I did that whole email follow-up to the asynchronous, I had a good handful of students respond. They were appreciative. They were happy that I had done that, especially during the pandemic, right? But yeah, they really do appreciate that. I remember very vividly, at least one student who did actually, it turned into a whole almost like reference exchange, basically. They had some questions and they asked some questions. So guess what? That opens the door in a way, they may hesitate. They may not come back, but if you've opened that door, they've got that email to respond to. They could just go in and hit reply and just say, oh, I do have a question, right? So that's just a really interesting thing to think about, right? In your dynamic and the way that you handle that. So, I mean, this is such a broad, I probably could have said so many sub lessons, right? But I want to keep this broad and usable, right? So, but communicate in various ways, right? That is critical, talking to students, communicating with students. All right, so the information. So I'm going to go through this. How do you prefer to present information to students? What's your go-to? Give you just a moment to do that. I think we're doing good on timing while I'm looking at that. Yeah. Oh, good. I'm glad LibGuides came up because that's actually my favorite. PowerPoint, sure, yep. Ooh, LibGuides are winning. YouTube, yep. So maybe that, yep. Different ways, right? A demo, right? Giving a demo, yep. Microsoft. Good, good. So a little variety there, right? Some different ideas, ways that people like to communicate. And I'm seeing LibGuides, which is excellent because that's my go-to, right? But think about in the class, right? You might have used, and I definitely used PowerPoint before, more to keep things on track than anything. It does keep student attention, right, with graphics and stuff. But I'm the kind of person who I welcome tangents. I like tangents. I like to answer questions in the moment that are just important in the moment. So I need that to kind of bring us back and keep us on track, right? Get us back onto what we were going to get to, right? So I find that really helpful for that. I wouldn't sit there reading off slides the whole time. Library resources, so demonstrations, right? Some kind of brief demo, you have to show them the stuff at some point, right? So getting into the databases, LibGuides, right? A few quick demos, but you are clicking between different programs and windows, which I think we're all pretty adept with technology. You're used to it, right? But you are kind of going from one thing to another. So when you were giving students, though, something as a takeaway, well, let's face it, paper handouts get lost and never to be heard from again. They're gone. So is all that effort and time really worth it? Like, you make this really awesome handout, you think it's great, it's informative, you hand it, and then it goes right, hopefully into the recycling bin, but it goes somewhere, right? It's tossed, it's gone. They're only seeing it once, and they're only seeing you once. So you expect them, they're going to take this away and they're going to know everything, and it's going to really jog their memory. And they also don't always need it yet, right? They might be in a case where hopefully you've scheduled it at the right time, but even then it's going to be a few days later, right? They have to kind of find it again. They may have time to practice in class, but they may not. A lot of us make course guides, right? A lot of folks are familiar with this. It might be pretty simple, database best bets, activities, right? That kind of thing. It was pretty supplementary. During the pandemic, I created virtual handouts. So I merged everything together, essentially. So I structured the session and the presentation, right? And all the handout tutorial information into one place. All the activity links were there to click on. So the material's there for when students need it in class to walk them through. But then I tell them, this is for you to use later. I'd remind them where stuff was like kind of more tutorial-y. So we wouldn't sit there reading tutorials, but they had it for later. I used it for control. I use LibGuides for this for control, ease of editing. I was able to put in like databases, right? But the important thing I didn't have a chaotic presentation where I was going between a slide and a guide and back and forth and having links in slides when, you know how it is to click on a link from a slide. You wait a minute, you hope it opens, right? I wanted things to be smooth. Simplifying was important to me during this process. And you could collect stats. And I thought that was cool. You could see what links they're using. You can see what databases, you can see when they use guides later. I think after, I'm keeping this, Paper and I are breaking up. That's it, right? I definitely think that this is going to be the way because of structuring the session, having it follow the flow of what I'm doing and having them have this takeaway they use later that they're already familiar with. I can edit it if something comes up in class, if there's a mistake, right? You can't edit a piece of paper too easily. And you're only providing this one link. And then everyone, say you're sitting in a computer lab, everyone can follow in person. So the big lesson here is to give students something they need. They can use it for when they need it most. All right, so the activity section, I have already talked about a lot of stuff. This is where like that overlap started to come in and I go, well, you know what, I'll keep this section. I'll, just to kind of go over some stuff. So I'm not gonna go over in great detail, right? But the idea is you're having, icebreakers, outcome-based assessments that fit what you want to do, right? With your lesson plans. It was really interesting to me because I simplified everything, right? And simplify is what I already talked about. But I added something. You're going, wait, you added something? But maybe it was something too that may have already been there that I just noticed. Either way, little extras. I'll talk about what I mean, but I'm keeping it all. I already talked about this with the tech check, but keep your intros short and simple, right? Tie to the theme, practice the tech. Now, the little extras, what do I mean by that? These are like little check-ins. So asking how people are doing, right? Like I did at the start, you could do it in the middle, you do it at the end, right? Throughout the session, get up and stretch, move around, turn on your cameras if you're comfortable, wave, make a funny face, do something, share something, share a fun screen in the background, share something in chat, you share a fun link, I don't know, something, right? Something like that. Have a quiet moment for a few seconds, right? Just take a breather. Just these little things that don't take much away from what you're doing, right? There's definitely totally in-person equivalence. And I think some of us already were doing this naturally, right? It might be in the natural flow class. You may not notice you do it. I don't think students even notice if you do it. They won't put that on their, right, their evaluation of your class, like, oh, I loved that we did this. Maybe they will, I don't know. But, you know, instead of backgrounds, maybe share a fun phone picture, your phone background, right? Get up and move, meditate, have that quiet space. Other non-intensive, I always see that. I always want to say non-invasive. I don't know why, but non-invasive, non-intensive, right? Low stakes, quick, non-assessed things, right? These are like super quick ideas. So the key there is keep it simple. Think about what you really want to know. So that goes back to all the stuff, all those other best practices, right? With planning, technology, communication, and so on. All right, so every interaction counts. And I think that was, you know, I think that has come up already, but this is really kind of where it, you know, like it came into, I want to make sure to put it on there, right? Make sure that it was noted. And when you're simplifying, do consider, oh yeah, I'm simplifying. That's right, I did put simplify in there because I just want you to keep in mind, not all questions are necessarily as useful as you think they are. I know, you know, you may create this great form, you know, form, quiz, whatever, with a whole bunch of questions. But, you know, if you had, like say I had 4, I'd break it down to 2, something like that, right? So really cutting things down. And those 2 questions ended up being super important and super valuable anyway, right? So it was okay as far as a takeaway there. Okay. All right, so we're going to talk about attitudes. I see we're getting, yep, we're doing okay with time. Yep, exactly. So good. So we have time to go through this. So I have just a couple more polls. So before times, what kind of moods or feelings did students express in class? We'll do these real quick because I want to make sure I get the material in. So what did you notice? What kind of, you know, before, right? When you were teaching or around boredom. Let's face it. I appreciate honesty, right? Honesty is good. Tired. It's been a long day. Is it noon yet? Right. Disinterest. Yeah. Boredom. Okay. So there was all this kind of, confusion. Yeah, definitely. During, what did you notice? What feelings did you notice? Did you notice feelings from students? What kind of things did they express during the pandemic? Quiet. A lot of appreciation. Oh yeah. Appreciation. Yeah. I noticed that too. The anxiety, I also noticed it was almost palpable, even though they weren't physically in a room. It's really interesting, right? Yeah, the classes were really quiet. That is something that's kind of an interesting, right, thing, that lack of verbal interaction, right? Frustration, chat usage, yep. The quiet, the silence, the ever prevailing silence. So in the interest of time, I'll keep going, but we could spend a while, right, talking about this. The point being, you know, attitudes are variable. Let's face it. You as the teacher, it's going to depend on your enjoyment of teaching, your confidence, but your mood at the moment too. You could love teaching, but like you've got family stuff going on, so it's weighing on you, or like, you know, your car broke down or exploded on your way to work. Oh no, right? There's all kinds of stuff that can affect it. But I think a lot of us, and I know I'm guilty, right, going into autopilot, like, you know, business as usual, same old, gotta teach again. Okay, I'm in teacher mode, right? For students, yeah, you'd have this, you know, maybe you've got those engaged, interested one first. I try to be optimistic, but let's face it, they're hungry. They've got the class just before lunch. They're bored out of their minds, and so on. I like the confusion because that happens, right? Now, during the pandemic, there was a lot of stress going on. Now, you as the teacher were hopefully being reassuring. That's why I put that in parentheses, right? You know, you were kind of like, you had this empathy for everyone, and I think everyone had empathy for each other. Making mistakes, you know, I know I was not so concerned with being polished, and we got this weird professional casual melding. You know, so you were sitting at home, you were being invited into student bedrooms, which I always just find funny and weird, right? They might be sitting on their bed having their class. It's this weirdly intimate space that you're suddenly there in, right? So that was happening. Or you would see people's pets on the screen, which the pet video bomb was like the best thing. But everything is weird. That was the big takeaway, right? And same for students. There was definitely more stress and anxiety and uncertainty. Everything is weird. It's even more variable than ever. What I thought was funny, though, was that I noticed more humanity emerging from behind a screen. There was much more of a focus on mental health, self-care, checking in, the language change. I put these in here from actual emails I received during the pandemic. A lot of us had a sign off, like our sign off would be stay safe, stay healthy, or you'd open with that, right? Hope your family's doing okay. Oh my gosh, it did feel like a parallel universe. And a lot of personal stories came up. Like when you talk to students, like I think even more so than before, ever before really, they would get personal with you. Or I had a situation outside of work, actually. I had a hotel reservation I canceled. Somehow that didn't go through. So I had to talk to the credit card company. Point being, I had this conversation that suddenly turned personal with a woman at a credit card company. And we talked for like it was like an hour. It was very strange. You know, and she kind of started it and it snowballed from there. And we were talking about things. But anyway, this stuff would never have happened pre-pandemic. So after, I think, you know, no more usual, not in the sense of, oh no, pandemic, right? Pandemic times. I think let's try and have the focus on mental health and empathy without all of the stress and anxiety, right? That was brought about by the pandemic. Being nurturing, right? All of that stuff that's very important because we don't know who we're getting, right? When those students come back, we don't know what we're going to see. They might be really excited and eager because they want to resume like life is normal. And let's face it, they're young, they're inexperienced. It was difficult for them. I actually have a lot of empathy for the fact that they had a hard time staying away from each other. I kind of understand on some level. It's hard. You try to help them do their best. But yeah, it was difficult for them. But some of them will be apprehensive or stressed when they're coming back. Some of them are dealing with trauma. Some of them have lost loved ones, right? So we really need to be aware of this as we return. So here's my running list. We're getting close to, I'm watching. So empathy, humanity, flexibility, patience, right? The last couple things to add in there. So now just visualize yourself teaching after, right? And what do you see, right? This can be our kind of, and this is our closing thoughts. And, you know, feel free if you do have questions, put them in the chat too. You know, I had a lot to talk about. I wanted to hopefully have a little time for questions, but I will share one more little visual with you as we get our answers in here. But hopefully this gave you some things to think about, right? To consider, like when you're coming back, following up. Okay, so somebody's going to do a follow-up. You know, that's something that I noticed, and I really was kind of, oh wow, that does work. Yep, names. Okay, somebody else is on board with that. It was just a weird thing I never expected, right? Personal connections. Paying more attention to what my colleagues are doing. That's an interesting one, right? So maybe seeing what folks, you know, learning from each other, right? Yep, LibGuides is handouts. That's what I'm doing, absolutely. Being flexible, video. Yeah, I think, and that comes back to the meetings. I said that with faculty, but with students too, right? When I was talking about like, yeah, you're having a face-to-face and through video, there are definitely going to be times where the student maybe can't come in, but you can have a little chat. Yeah, understanding, flexibility, compassion, going back to that empathy. Okay, back channel, yep. And I think that, yes, that we are more used to being real techie. So I'm going to give you a couple of links. I actually have links to charts that will help us. I'll throw those in the chat. But I do want you to keep in mind, here are some foods before and after they were domesticated. They look very different, right? The banana's on there, right? The ever-present banana that had its crisis, but it still exists. But the point being, you do need to cultivate things, right? And things will look, you know, they might go through some things. There might be growing pains. But in the end, hopefully you've cultivated a really good, right, something really good out of it. So be ready for the change, though. Things will change. Things will look different. Some things will stay the same. Right. So what I'm going to do is I'll throw those links into the chat. I figured it was kind of, I wanted us to use our space and time and space together to brainstorm. I thought that was important. I thought filling out a chart would be kind of boring during, or actually I do have the small links. I'll do those. So this is something for you to take away to consider. You don't have to keep the categories as they are. I just wanted to give you a starting point. So here's mine filled out with my notes, and then I'll throw in the one that is, you know, for you to copy or download, make it your own. I figured it was something that's more individualized that you can kind of, you know, just to get you thinking, right? And hopefully this gave you some stuff to think about, like, you know, like the brainstorming, right? Kind of considerations and ideas I had, but I want to thank you all. And I know we're kind of really close to time for questions, but if you do have any questions, y'all take a look at the chat, see what's going on. If there's anything major. Yeah, there's never enough time for summer projects. I did see that earlier and I wanted to comment. Yeah, I agree. I understand that. Big fan of chat. Yep, I had mentioned that. At least 2 classes moved to Zoom due to weather. So that is doable. Yeah, I learned too, right? And once you had to get used to it. And we're going next to the keynote. Cool. We're in the right place. Pick the right one, right? The right room. Yay, great. Oh, thank you. Yes, I appreciate it. This was great. Okay, good. Thank you. Appreciation's good, right? Reaching out and being appreciative, all those kind of things really help, right? All right. Excellent, excellent. Yay. And I'm going to stop sharing because I know that we'll be transferring over to the keynote. A lot to think about. Yeah, helping students to save or bookmark. You could put a tutorial in there and say, here's how to save this, by the way. You could have that right in a box. I love using boxes. Yep. So I would put something in there that says, did you know you could save? Right? I love those kind of things. Yep, food for thought. Good, good. And that's what I wanted out of this. So yay. All right.